Hey guys, it's Standing for Truth coming to you tonight. I know it's a little bit late, but I've got Raw Matt here with me. We're going to have a lot of fun tonight debunking somebody who's terrified to debate us. As you're going to clearly see from the video itself that we're about to debunk, he's clearly reading from something on Google. The guy has no idea what he's talking about. The video is weak. The arguments that he uses are weak. It has to do with the entropic degeneration of our genome. So we're going to go through it. We're going to debunk it. It's not going to be hard. It's going to be fun. So we're going to start here. I'm going to introduce Raw Matt here. Matt, if you want to say a couple things, go ahead, and then we'll go. Actually, if you want to talk about what your specialty is, I know you've got a lot of good information, debunking evolution. Say a few things, and then we'll go right into the video.
Yeah, no problem, man. Hey, everyone. Yeah, I go by Raw Matt. I just mostly have spoken and written a lot of books on dietary health and nutrition and longevity and genetics and diseases. I have a lot of different books out there. And then one thing I came across when I was just doing my studies is the massive amounts of deleterious mutations in the human genome and how they affect us all in many different forms, especially when it comes to cancer. And I couldn't really ignore that information. So the more I kept researching it, I noticed that something about like creationism kept coming up. So I looked into that. I was like, wow, I guess that's what I am now. So it was hard to ignore the evidence. And now I've incorporated that into my research and my science and into my writings. And it helps so much more because I'm now ready to help the diseases be cured through epigenetic regulation. So my books exist, and I've actually mostly been writing now on creationism because I've noticed that there's creationists out there, but I think my perspective is a lot different than theirs. So I've been writing on that. That's how I found you, and you found me. So
well, obviously you're following the evidence where it leads. That's awesome. Actually, yeah, you know what? Before we go into the debunking of this video, I noticed you were talking about epigenetics there and epigenetic regulation in relation to diseases. Did you want to touch on that a little bit? And I've noticed evolutionists have a lack of knowledge in regards to epigenetics. Did you want to briefly just kind of explain that and why it's not good news for evolution, and kind of just give us the rundown on that, Matt?
yeah, no problem. Epigenetics is kind of like the beginning of genetics. It's a new field of research, so it really hasn't been studied too much. My field of observation with epigenetics is really how it refers to longevity in the human body. We identified two separate genes specifically when it came to regulation of how long a human being can live. And what I mean by epigenetics is they're like switches in the human body. And just imagine if every gene was turned on inside of your body, what would happen? You would probably get cancer. It would be a horrible problem. So we need things to regulate these genes when they can switch on and off. And most of the time, the body does a pretty efficient job at doing this, and oftentimes it doesn't. Whether or not we've inherited horrible genetics, or whether or not we've inherited some deleterious mutation, or whether or not we obtain some other form of disease later in life. Either way, these epigenetic regulation switches in our body can be controlled by us and our environment and our diet and even how we think. So the science really is kind of new in this area, and I jumped on it right at the very beginning. So I like to study and learn about the new genes and how they're switched on. For example, we could take mTOR. When this is a downregulated, or let's just say switched off, it in turn regulates and now turns on other genes like the sirtuins or the FOXO genes. And what I like about this is that I can get everybody now living at least 10, 15 years longer just by changing a few concepts of their body, a couple principles, for example. So maybe at the end of this video, if people want to stick around, I can tell about how they can do that, and they can add years to their life. Simple. I want creation scientists to be applicable. I don't really care for the geology and the paleontology. I think it's a waste of time in the fields of science. I think those are wasted man hours. They don't do anything to benefit humanity. So I think creationism should be the next level.
I think that's awesome. Yeah, you're looking for obviously the all the data, the information, from young Earth creationism, and you want to make it applicable, and it's certainly applicable in regards to our health, in regards to natural healings. So I think that's awesome. Yeah, I'd certainly love to talk more about epigenetics and how it relates to those things for sure. On the screen here, I've got genetic entropy, just for the audience to have a reference point, but just to kind of explain, what we mean by that, like the central part of, the entropic degeneration of our genome is that, mutations, they're accumulating so quickly in some creatures that natural selection cannot stop the functional degradation of the genome. But most importantly, it's not going to drive an evolutionary process that's going to turn, a fish to fisherman, because obviously the reality, just like this slide says, mutations are overwhelmingly harmful and deleterious. Random mutations destroy information. And the thing is, selection acts on the phenotype, right? So it's essentially just acting on mutant and more mutant, because if we've accumulated these thousands of deleterious mutations, we're all more or less mutants. So there's this huge selection cost in regards to that. But just to kind of destroy a straw man before we get right into this, because I'm sure you've had this rebuttal or objection, but the evolutionists will say, based on what we say in regards to the accumulating damage, they'll say that, most mutations are not harmful, but neutral. But that response, that objection, misunderstands the entire point that we're saying. Because yes, most mutations are neutral, from the perspective of the organism's physical fitness, but all mutations must have effect on the genetic content, right? Like, in no way are mutations truly neutral, because they must have an effect on the genotype, right? Even if they affect, say, the efficiency of transfer RNA production, either way, it's still going to contribute to the overall degradation of the genome. I think a simple analogy would be, and I know the evolutionists hate it, but it's mostly because they misunderstand what we even mean by entropic degeneration. But it's like rust slowly spreading throughout a car over time, right? Each little bit of rust that I'm comparing to, say, a single near neutral mutation in an organism, it's almost meaningless or inconsequential on its own. But say the rusting process cannot be stopped, it's eventually going to destroy the car. It's almost like a book. Take a book like the encyclopedia. If you get one single spelling mistake in that book, it's not going to affect the book as a whole, but the accumulation of spelling mistakes over time, overall, they're individually neutral, but as they accumulate, that destroys the message. So essentially what we're saying is we're going down, not up. Would you agree with everything I've said on in regards to that, Matt?
Absolutely. Simply because of the fact that, okay, going back, actually, I know entropy isn't the word that they like, because entropy doesn't have a tendency to be combined with biological material. So entropy might be the wrong word. So if it bothers them or bothers you, then simply change it to degradation. That's easy. And you can actually get through this video. The very fact that we actually see about 20,000 new diseases, which are genetic mutations, in 2017 in the human DNA population. Now the total number is 214,158. The genetic human database has actually shown an annual growth of 24,000 new diseases every single year. So it's an empirical fact that mutations and diseases are growing exponentially. So when they ever find like one random mutation, like, oh, good, look, that one fights against this disease. Well, great. A lot of good that does with 24,000 new diseases. It helps with one. That's not enough to weigh out the problem. See what I mean?
Yep. So really, it all comes down to net loss versus net gain, which I think is a huge problem with Paulogia's, well, for one, his understanding, and with his video at hand that obviously we're about to review. Because just like you said, if you have this influx of deleterious mutations, this influx of new mutation-related diseases, and all of a sudden you get this, even if you do get a random, say, beneficial mutation or something, I mean, it's not going to counterbalance the damage that's going on in, at a genetic level. Even if we limited our attention to, say, just the 600 billion new mutations that, say, entered the human gene pool within our own generation, right? Say 100 new mutations times well over 6 billion people, that's huge. And obviously, if selection isn't just going to select against mutants, it has to select between, you know, individuals that are more mutant and less mutant. So like I said earlier, that's a huge selection cost, which means even if you selected out, you know, let's say there's a room of 100 people and you selected out 50 of, say, the most mutant, you're still left with 50% of the population that's more mutant than the previous generation. I mean, this degradation problem really can't be stopped, right?
That's right. There's really nothing that they've actually been able to find, because nothing is really looked at more by doctors than disease, and they focus on this constantly. I mean, every year there's a new textbook for medical students, and the book gets thicker and thicker and thicker, and frankly, with the amount of medicines that come out, they can't even keep up with it. I mean, America is the most vaccinated and GMO'd country in the world, and we're the second largest food producer in the world as well. And then that would mean that we should probably be a healthy model for other countries. But no, that's not even true at all. With half our children being sick 24 hours, 7 days a week, with half the amount of the United States children pretty much chronically sick and ill with asthma, allergies, disabilities, and mental illnesses like autism and epilepsy. Basically, the numbers are 32 million children are sick every single day of the year. And they don't know how to fix this at all.
No, they don't, which is amazing. I mean, how many people do you know that go to the doctors with, you know, a certain symptom or group of symptoms, and the doctor has no idea what it is? Right. And they go through all these different testings, and they spend thousands of dollars trying to come up with a diagnosis, and eventually they're diagnosed with, you know, fibromyalgia or all these different made up syndromes. Or they just try and mask the pain with some type of analgesic or anti-inflammatory drug and just make the problem worse, right? Because you're just putting a Band-Aid over whatever the real problem is. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah, unfortunately, symptom suppression is what pharmaceuticals tend to do. They don't really cure anything. They just symptom suppress. Because what happens, again, it goes back to evolution. If we're just chemical species, then they think you can fix it with a chemical. And all that does is just change and induce more problems usually. Because if you want to be really depressed, read the side effects on your pills.
Oh, I know. As someone who administers medications, I see that list of side effects, and it's scary because suddenly you're taking one or two drugs for, say, a certain symptom or whatever, you know, disease is associated with the symptom. But because of those side effects in those one or two drugs, all of a sudden it's a ripple effect, and you're on 10 to 15 different drugs just to counterbalance the side effects from the two original drugs you were taking.
Yeah, what a nightmare. And it doesn't cure anybody. That's the other problem. No. It obviously doesn't benefit anybody if it cures them. So that's another huge issue as well. And probably either conspiracy to some people or the fact that it's a business. That's the most important aspect. Yeah. Kind of like evolution. Evolution's a huge business. I mean, so whether or not they want to see it is another thing, but a lot of people just don't know any better. They either don't have the time to study a disease until they either have it, and then it's probably too late, or the doctors are looking at all the wrong thing. If they actually took the creationism perspective of it and looked at genetics, there would be a huge influx of disease eradicating medicine that I believe would exist.
Well, just like in this video, you know, we're going to get to it, but Paulogia, you know, he talks a lot about, you know, where's the evidence? Where's the empirical data? Where's the real-time evidence of genome degradation? It's like, do you not see that in this day and age, we have a pandemic of Alzheimer's disease, dementia, autism, asthma, autoimmune-related diseases, cancers, immunological diseases? I mean, there's an obvious pandemic, and a lot of it probably is epigenetic mutation, but what we're seeing is entropic degeneration on all levels. So how can these evolutionists ask, where's the evidence? It's everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. When I talk to them, I get the same response. They'll bring up one thing and say like, well, okay, cancer only rises because people are living longer today. Well, guess what? Life expectancy has actually reached a plateau since the 70s, and actually it's been going down in the last few decades. Not a lot, but down. And all the while, cancer's been going up. With the new facts, matter of fact, Cancer Online, the research shows their own database system will tell you that they expect by the year 2030 cancers will be 50% more than what they are today. How is that? How is that not proof?
Yeah, that was exactly. And I've seen a rebuttal, which I suspect this Paulogia guy probably got it from. This is most of the information in the video. But in the rebuttal, he tries to say that human lifespan has recently been increasing, but clearly that's, due to, improved diet, sanitation, modern medicine, I guess. But at the end of the day, the average may have gone up, but the maximum possible lifespan has not gone up. And it's a pretty simple concept. So to see these weak arguments being used anyways, it really is telling, I guess, in regards to the truth of genome degradation, because they fight the obvious. They
Oh
fight
yeah.
what's so evident, right?
Just like you said, it's not because human beings are now genetically better, so we're living longer. No, there's intervention. We're keeping people alive because of things that we're doing to them. Normally, a person would be dead if they have the problems of let's say my family, but no, medical intervention jumps in and they fix that collapsed lung. They fix your heart. They open you up and they replace a valve. That was undoable in the 50s. So that's why people are living longer. It's not quality of life, that's for sure.
It's not quality of life. You're absolutely right. I mean, you got 90-year-olds, 80-year-olds living in a nursing home with absolutely no quality of life. So that's not the same thing. And we're going to get into this video now, but I want the audience to pay close attention to the arguments that we're seeing, because the arguments are speaking of the obvious, okay? Beneficials happen, selection happens, adaptation happens. At the end of the day, any high school student knows these things. The argument of genome degradation only begins after the acknowledgement of these obvious things. So you're going to notice that he's going to invoke natural selection, beneficials. This means, once again, that they misunderstand the entire point at hand. Those things are obvious, but those things aren't going to solve the genome degradation problem. So let's start it now. Or actually, if you have something to say to that, Matt, and then I'll press play.
No, I like it. All good. Let's hit it.
Superbad, did you have something to say, brother?
What does the hide participants mean? The upper left of the screen.
Participants? What does it say? Three? Because it's the three of us.
It's color red.
I'm not too sure, Superbad, but we're live right now, so just mute yourself. Okay, just one sec. We're gonna start this video now and make sure we can hear properly. Matt, whenever you want me to stop, you just tell me to pause it, and we'll give our thoughts and our critique of what's being said. Okay, brother?
Okay. I don't hear it.
Nope. Matt, are you having a hard time hearing it?
I was, but as long as you hear it, I'm just worried about the audience.
Okay, but
there is a problem too. I cannot hear it very well as well.
Here, let me see. So if I, this is the first time that I'm critiquing a video like this. So let me, so for me to have to, let's see here. Now you can't hear anything of it though, right?
Try it again. No.
Okay. So if I go to, let's see. So I guess I would have to do, so if I go to, yeah, I'm going to stop sharing real quick. If I go to it right, say from my phone, and then, let's see. And you've, in your book, you've given a good critique to this as well, right?
I try to really hit every single topic that he brings up from the very beginning of the video, but you know, it doesn't start up until about 7 minutes in. Or
yeah, because that's when he actually starts to address the. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to screen share what's going on, but I'm going to play it from my. Okay, tell me if you can hear this. Okay, just one sec.
Some of the other factors that play a role. For
yes.
example, the principle
Okay.
of natural selection, where the
Okay, so I'm going to put it on right here. I'm going to start it at 5. Actually, I'm going to start it at exactly 5 minutes. And then you, once again, just tell me when you want to pause it and then give your thoughts, okay?
Sure. No problem.
Okay, just 1 second. And if you're having a hard time hearing it, I'm just muting this. Let me know. I'm going to start it now.
carry on.
It would be like if you're teaching a high school biology class, and at the end of the year, all the students had to make a copy of their textbook and throw away the textbook that they used and hand the copy on to the next student.
Oh boy.
Or what if you live in the 2nd century CE, and if you want a copy of someone's book about this cool guy named Jesus, the only way to get one was to copy it by hand.
That's what it's like. Little mistakes occur every generation.
In the science textbook or in the Bible, or both.
Eventually, no student will possibly be able to pass biology class because there'll be so many mistakes in every textbook.
How many copies do you think that would take, Robert? How many years was the Bible copied by hand? Never mind, we're here to talk about genetics, right?
That's pretty much what we're seeing happening in human genetics over time. Every generation has more mistakes than the generation before.
Oh, well, if you want to extend the textbook copying analogy to genetics, you'll need to modify it to better reflect some of the other factors that play a role. For example, the principle of natural selection, where the organisms best suited for their environment will have more offspring than those less suited. In your classroom, only the most accurate copies would be handed to the next students, while the least accurate copies would be discarded. Because genes are inherited from 2 parents, the textbook copier should have 2 originals in front of them as they do the work, thereby increasing the chances that an unaltered version would carry forward. You would also need the concept of beneficial mutations, where these books might also be improved by the students copying them. These improved copies would be even more favored to hand over to the new students than the originals. However, this analogy is inherently problematic as it assumes we're starting off with a perfect original textbook that appeared from nowhere. But we know that the first textbook wasn't created from the dust of the ground or the rib of a man. The first textbooks would have been disconnected observations about the world recorded on clay or papyrus. Over time, more observations recorded on parchment. And over more time, some connecting ideas like movement to the stars or functions of the body. Years pass and the ideas that proved most useful stayed in the book, and obsolete ideas excluded. New editions are continually produced, each improving on the last, refining branches to cosmology, physics, chemistry, biology. The classroom analogy doesn't work unless you somehow assume a scenario of a sudden perfect original text with no previous basis and no room for future improvement. And that's why this degrading book example really only works for something like the Bible. I assume Eric doesn't want to talk about a degrading Bible.
Which means eventually we are going to go extinct.
Okay, we finally get to Robert's first scientific claim, though he doesn't make it directly. What he implies.
Okay, Matt, you could hear that okay?
Yes, I heard it. And the reason I said, okay, pause it is because I heard mistakes in that as well. Of course, he was just giving an analogy, so I'm not going to critique that very much. But what I did notice that he did say is that we're comparing genetics basically to the Bible, and the Bible is obviously wrong because it has mistakes in it, and therefore it's an unreliable thing to copy over and over. However, if you want to actually look at the evidence, we can just go through a few of them, and we can talk about statistical odds, for example. Like, what are the odds that all humans can come from one single female? just like the Bible says, for example.
Yeah.
So what they have to invoke that it must have just been a bottleneck, or that the female just had male babies, or some other astronomically high statistical improbability. And then we can say that rapid genetics is what we see. They would have to say, well, like he said, well, they could have made mistakes in the book, just like the Bible did. And or we could say, what are the odds that we're fruitarian, like the Bible says, or what are the odds that obligate carnivores can live off plants? Or like the Bible described, or the best genetics point to the Middle East, or that all human language can't arise on its own. All of these things are talked about in the Bible, but they have no evidence for any of this in their theory. So I don't know why he would make such a ridiculous comment about.
It's just like what we were talking about earlier here with the three major haplogroups, right? I mean, on the screen, I've got it shared, and it's like there's three independent lines of evidence that fit exactly what we see in mitochondrial DNA. We got the three major haplogroups that point directly to Noah's sons and their three wives. So it's like, well, what are the chances of that happening in an evolutionary worldview? I mean, it's just kind of a silly thing to say, a silly argument. And the thing is, with the degradation, I mean, he must not realize that, human, even if you put it into perspective, human mutation rate, it's a fact that it's 100 mutations per person per generation. So our children would have 100 mutations more than we have, and our grandchildren are then going to have 100 more mutations than they have. So that's not only disturbing on a personal level, but also on a population level, right? Because if there's 100 mutations per person and there are 7 billion people on the planet, then there is 700 billion new mutations entering the human population this generation. So the whole question really becomes what type of selection, because we're not denying selection. He went on a rant there about selection. How can selection eliminate so many mutations that are pouring into the human population, right? This whole genome degradation, the problem arises after we acknowledge, like I said, natural selection.
Yeah, I mean, we have genetic testing nowadays. Anybody can go online and order a kit of 23andme.com and spit in it and send it off and get their analysis, and they can see the inherited degenerational mutations that they've inherited from their families. My friend has like 18. He collected them both from his mother and father. He has lactose intolerance. He has a bad heart. He has diverticulitis. He's got all these problems that are just inherited from his family. And I don't know, I mean, do these people not know that exists? Or are they too busy creating cartoons where they're actually buffed when they're a fat ass? I don't know.
I think that could be what it is. Okay, here, let's, I'll get it going. If you ever have difficulty hearing, let me know, and then just yell nice and loud pause once you want to say something in regards to what he's saying. Okay, brother?
Got it.
What I know from having read his partner John Stanford's book is that harmful genetic mutations are accumulating in humans, and at a sustained rate such that these accumulated mutations will be the cause of death in humans in some unspecified way. Perhaps we'll lose the ability to reproduce like in children of men, or perhaps stop having limbs or faces or the good sense to put food in our mouths. The nature of this predicted genetic extinction event is unclear, as we don't have any examples of any other species that died out from too many mutations, which is odd because there are plenty of organisms on the planet with higher relative rates of genetic mutation and much, much shorter lifespans, and therefore have had orders of magnitude more generations for this genetic entropy to kill them, or at least affect them in some observable way.
Give us some of the.
Okay, I'm going to pause it right there, because based on what he's saying, what I find funny, and he's going to bring it up in a little while as well as an example for large scale pawns come to people type evolution, because he's saying there's no real-time examples. Obviously, we've already addressed and debunked that with the increase in mutation related diseases. But even if you look at Lenski's experiment, what did he I don't think he did it on purpose because he was trying to prove evolution, but he demonstrated entropic decay, right? I mean, he's seen reductive evolution because all the mutations, all the, say, beneficial, quote unquote, mutations in that experiment, they were reductive. Loss of function, loss of promoter, loss of genes. So what these bacteria have done, they've painted themselves into a corner. They're handicapped, they're lazy, right? And they're getting rid of genes short term for that, say, artificial environment, but what it is long-term degeneration. So there's an example that, well, I know Richard Dawkins likes to flaunt about that in his book, The Greatest Show on Earth. And obviously, as you're going to see here, Paulogia kind of praises that experiment as well, but that experiment proves what we're saying all along.
And he also obviously doesn't know that the many animals show a massive amount of degradation, and many have gone extinct. We've only been looking at genetics in animals for a very short relative time in history. And we know that matter of fact, that chimpanzees have accumulated over 140,000 different slightly deleterious mutations. And the chimpanzees are almost nearly extinct. They have the same diseases that humans do. They can't even live past 30 years old anymore. The average age for them is 15. They have trouble reproducing, and they're estimated to be only 600 of them left in the wild. Polar bears are another perfect example because we know that they're deteriorating horribly fast. They're almost extinct themselves. So I don't know where he's coming up with this.
Well, I know where he's coming up with it. Oh, did you want to say something, Superbad?
I would just like to add a little thing. It'll be quick.
No, of course. Take as much time as you need.
It's been a long time ever since I checked Dr. Sanford's work. But correct me if I'm wrong, I recall some evolutionists did agree to his book. And those evolutionists who agreed to his book were forced to suggest that natural selection may have been stronger in the past because we really see this degradation. So I don't know, I forgot the sources, but that's what I recall. So that's all.
Oh, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I would like Paulogia to find us one serious population geneticist that doesn't agree that man is presently degenerating, because they all agree that, you know, deleterious mutations are too subtle to be effectively selected away, right? But the question is what fraction? And just like you said, yeah, of course they've invoked natural selection. You know, they're still going to hold to their, you know, science fiction religion of evolution. But the question is, at what point does the fitness effect of, say, a deleterious mutation become too small to be selected away? So you're absolutely right, Superbad. All serious population geneticists agree that man is presently degenerating, and that's why they have rescue devices, you know, artificial rescue devices, which we can get into later, such as you know, mutation count mechanism. They invoke synergistic epistasis. But this Paulogia, just like you said, Matt, you know, where's he getting this from? Well, the guy has no idea, because all he's doing, and I think he's getting a lot of this off, it's a blog by a guy named Scott. So I think it's called Letters to Creationists. I think he's just reading right from it, because he obviously has no idea what he's talking about, which is probably why he refuses a debate, right?
Oh, matter of fact, I just thought of something. He said it about 1 minute ago. It just now came to my memory. He might have a different idea entirely about what we're talking about, because he did say this specifically. He said, what genetic event is going to cause us to die out? So maybe he's thinking that genetic entropy isn't like a slow slope that's building up and we're seeing more every generation. He's thinking of it like a bottleneck, for example.
Yeah,
maybe that's where he's coming from, because he did.
I think he's fighting a straw man, right? He doesn't actually understand what. Yeah, just like you said, you know, where's this big extinction event?
Right. Yeah, I don't think he knows what we're even talking about, which is funny that he made a video about it. But regardless, we'll completely destroy him the rest of this video. So we'll get on.
Well, and I'll say even one other thing, because, you know, where's the extinction events? Where's this? Where's that? Obviously, we're providing it. And if you actually look at, you know, new evidence for, say, you know, early human population, say Neanderthals, the evidence is suggesting that, you know, they were highly inbred and they had a very high genetic load. They were actually 40% less fit than modern humans. And the early human population is well known as the hobbits. I think it's Homo floresiensis. They were also inbred and apparently suffered from a special type of genomic degradation, which is what I was talking about earlier with Lenski's experiment, called reductive evolution. You know, the results, because these hobbits were small, right? So reduced body size, reduced brain volume, and other various pathologies. And even what people call Homo naledi was also inbred and also suffered from reductive evolution, as well as Homo erectus. So this genetic degeneration is evident on all levels. So if he wants examples, I mean, we can talk about it all day, but then we wouldn't be able to finish laughing at the rest of his video, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, did you have something to say, Superbad?
I'm not very familiar with genetic entropy because I haven't studied it in a long time. But like I said a while ago, since some evolutionists did suggest that natural selection may have been stronger in the past in order to compensate for the generation that's happening today, should they be able to, give us the numbers on how natural selection could be stronger in the past?
Actually, that's a really good point.
If not, if they cannot give us the numbers, then they are accused. They are guilty of the same accusation that they are accusing young Earth creationists of not being able to make testable and falsifiable prediction, right?
Well, in one of my debates with CRISPR, I asked him that exact same question because he invoked natural selection. What's funny is Paulogia later on, he says the exact same thing about natural selection being stronger in the past. And the thing is, without any numbers, without any testable predictions, without it being falsifiable, it's pseudoscience.
Yes.
So it's funny that they think that that's the answer, and yet they won't put it on paper. It's not testable. Right?
They're guilty. They're guilty.
They're guilty. So I'm in total agreement with you on that one. And actually, you'll see Paulogia brings that up. So we'll laugh at that later. I'm going to start it up again. Let me know that if you can hear it good, and let me know when to pause it, okay?
Some of the math, give us some of the science behind how you said it's going, how many times you gave us one thing, a number, it's going way too fast. The genetic downhill slide is happening fast.
Okay, I guess that's a question. Maybe. But I agree with Eric. This segment could really use some math and science. You got this, Robert.
Every child born has 60 to 100 mutations that the parent was not born with. Wow. And that's actually, that measurement is coming from a study in Iceland. That's the most recent, most accurate one.
The only genetic mutation study I could find associated with Iceland was this one. And it studied mitochondrial DNA mutation rates and not general genome mutation rates, which are quite different things. See my previous mitochondrial DNA video. I'm hoping Robert hasn't mixed these things up. That said, this study on rates of spontaneous mutation gives an estimate of 64 mutations per zygote. So that is within the low end of Robert's range, and I'm willing to just go with his numbers on this for the sake of argument. Note that James F. Crow is one of the co-authors. We'll talk about him later.
So that's 60 negative steps. It's like you're taking 60 steps backwards before you can even take an evolutionary step forwards.
Now, Robert, 60 mutations doesn't necessarily mean 60 steps backwards. Mutations could be negative, positive, or, which accounts for the vast majority, completely neutral. To imply that all mutations are negative is simply false. Also, the idea of forward or backward implies that evolution has some kind of directionality for it.
Of course it does.
Evolution merely favors the changes that encourage survival and increase reproduction within an ever.
Nothing about evolution theory proves that random mutation is a fact. Everything about it is guided. If it was random, everything would be a disaster.
Yeah, and even what he said about neutral mutations, the majority of them being neutral, I think we've already sufficiently debunked that. But mutations, which he's obviously unaware of, say at near neutral nucleotide positions, have to be deleterious, and then they're also subject to random drift and immune to selection. And why this is because these nucleotide sites do contain meaningful information. So as we said earlier, sure, a mutation on, say, one of these near neutral nucleotide sites, it may be neutral to the perspective of the organism, but it cannot be neutral, to the genetic content, because that mutation will contribute slowly to the erosion of information. And collectively, just like he said, these neutral nucleotides account for most of the information in the genome, right? So he obviously misunderstands the point at hand as well when we're talking about near neutral mutations.
That's right. And he also pretended as though that study was really hard to find, like I couldn't find it or something like that. It's like, what are you talking about? There's so many mitochondrial DNA studies that show anywhere between 63, like he was talking about, all the way up to 200 mutations per generation. I linked like 10 of them in response to that video. I couldn't believe it.
And obviously he didn't want to engage you on that because all he knows is the little information. You know what? There's a big reason why no serious population geneticist has actually written and published a rebuttal to genome degradation, because they know man is presently degrading. And that's why the best you're going to find is, you know, these couple blogs on the internet, which is where he got this information from. And when you challenge them on this, anything that goes outside what they've read in this blog, they have no answer, because there is no answer.
Don't know anything about human disease, because that's exactly where we come from this perspective, because the doctors aren't looking at it in that regard. They don't really care whether or not it's genetic, or whether or not it's diet related, or whether or not it's from radiation. They could care less. They just want to know what caused this and what gets rid of it. So we can find a lot from studying, scientific articles based on human disease.
Mm-hmm.
Matter of fact, I'm sorry, what?
No, I was just gonna say, like, just based on what he said with, you know, neutral mutations, like, I don't think he understands that the vast majority of deleterious mutations, they're not going to display any clear phenotype at all. Just like we were saying, the accumulating damage is largely invisible. Like rust on a car, like a single spelling mistake in a book the size of an encyclopedia. I mean, I think that's common sense, but collectively, that's where you get your damage, right?
That's right, exactly. And another thing is he doesn't know the other studies. They've actually tried to do multiple studies on different animals, and they've messed them up every single time. We can even go back to the Pottinger cat study, where they fed cats in zoos their same diet, but they changed it and they cooked it, because obviously storing raw meat doesn't last for too long. So they wanted to preserve, cook a bunch of it and preserve it and then give it to the cats. They actually crippled the generations that came after. About 2 or 3 generations later, the animals were crippled. Since that time, it's been illegal to actually cook animal foods in zoos since that time, because of that study. They genetically rapidly degraded to the point where they almost killed them all.
Wow. So you really do see this degradation on all levels.
Oh yeah, it's in animals, it's in bacteria, it's even in viruses, it's in everything. I mean, it's so transparent when you actually aren't going to look at it from like a biased perspective. If you actually just step back and say, all right, well, where can I find evidence for this? I really don't believe it. Well, we can look at heirloom plants, for example. You can take like a Lycium barbarum, and then you go, okay, well, what's the original tomato from today? And you can track it back to that heirloom plant. A tomato is a joke compared to that heirloom variety. A tomato today is it raises insulin and blood sugar levels. They're little sweet little cherry tomatoes that are horribly bad for you. And then you go to the Lycium barbarum. It lowers nuclear factor kappa B. It raises superoxide dismutase. It has an array of health benefits that are unbelievable. And so we even see it in plants. That's what I was getting at. And then we go to bacteria. We do viruses. We find even more. So I mean, we can test all things.
Well, I think it was the with virus, as you were saying, wasn't it the H1N1 influenza virus? Like there was I think it went for 70 years plus. There was a linear curve, and it was a linear accumulation of mutations, and it was really genetic entropy at work, because there was a decline of this H1N1, and it eventually went extinct based on the genetic degeneration. And that was the H1N1, I think, human version went extinct. Right. And now I think there's a swine flu version going around. So it's not the same thing. I think some evolutionists have strawmanned that one, but the H1N1 human version really did go extinct.
Yeah. In 2009, it's been gone. It's totally gone. It genetically degraded itself out of existence in our generation, and in basically a human lifetime. It's gone.
And that's what we'd expect to find in a virus like that if genome degradation was real, right? Because based on their mutation rates and
yeah, that's what we even see in human bodies when we look at endogenous retroviruses. We can see that our ancestors were stung by some kind of a viral load, and they survived it, and it embedded itself what appears to look like as junk DNA today. So we can actually look at it into the past, and we can see ancient viral loads that the human body survived from. It's kind of like when we get a flu every year. Every time we survive it, that's gonna show up in our genetics as either some form of junk DNA or some type of mysterious load that our ancestors from now will look back on and go, "Wow, what was that?"
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, we could just go on and on and on about the evidence for it, but one of his big straw man arguments is, show us the evidence. Well, we're showing you it. And it's one of those things where it's obvious we're going down, not up, and it's consistent with a biblical creation model. And you know what? They have the right to ignore the evidence. Ignorance is bliss. It's not a virtue though. But it doesn't take away the fact that it's true. And you know what? Any person with an open mind can look at the evidence and can clearly see that, what we see in regards to mutation, natural selection, the degradation process, it's inconsistent with large scale pond scum to people evolution. And that's why it's in the realm of pseudoscience. It's obvious.
Oh yeah, we've actually we've looked at 16 different Neanderthal DNA sequences when we first were able to start obtaining it, and we looked at their mtDNA and their mutation rates based on the NARS, and we actually found that their mutation rates were much lower than ours. Now that matches our predictions really, really good, considering that we look and we go, okay, well, modern man in the NARS D loop has 25 mutations, but Neanderthal has 5. Well, that's what we predicted. Right.
And it's funny, even with those facts, the fact that they were highly inbred and had a very high genetic load, which could or couldn't have maybe contributed to their extinction, is amazing as well. Because looking at, say, inbreeding and the genetic load that creates is almost like looking into the future and seeing what this genome-wide degradation can lead to. Because the more mutations we accumulate as a population, the stronger the chances is that we're going to inherit that exact same mutation. And that's what we're seeing in these highly inbred populations of humans, right?
Exactly. So I don't know what he means when he says there's no evidence. There's plenty. He just doesn't want to see it.
No, you're right. Okay, I'll continue it here. Once again, just let me know, brother. I know we could probably critique every 10 seconds, but okay, I'll go right here.
For changing environment. What's helpful today may not be helpful tomorrow.
It's going in the wrong direction for them.
Without passing judgment on Robert's research abilities, whatever skills he has as a science communicator.
I got to stop it there. I love how he tries to throw a jab at Dr. Rob Carter there, as if he could ever have a debate or a discussion with Rob. I mean, Rob Carter would run circles around the guy, and he's trying to throw a jab at him based on some blog that he read.
Yeah, like what's he ever done for science? I would love to know. I mean, yeah, what's he done for anybody, really? I mean, it would be amazing to imagine this guy, writing a scientific paper or article or journal or in his pastime. It's, if you want to compare a person to another person, I mean, by all means, throw down your accomplishments. I would love to see him.
Yeah, he thinks he's debunking, Dr. John Sanford and, say, Robert Carter and all population geneticists about genome-wide degradation, and yet Dr. Sanford just spoke, I think, last month at NIH. It's 2018, and yet this guy thinks that this problem has been solved, and yet NIH is letting him speak and give a lecture at their facility there, and I just find it amazing that this guy thinks that he's just completely destroyed the obvious, right?
That's right. And where was he during that debate? He thinks he can debunk this guy. Why wasn't he at that debate destroying him? Because you don't think that would be good for his channel? Give me a break.
And what's funny is the same objections and questions that he's bringing up in the question and answer period, those same people in the audience, in the auditorium, they asked those very same questions and brought up those same objections. And Dr. John Sanford just destroyed them.
Nice.
Just destroyed them. So anybody who wants to fight a straw man, they can go ahead, but it doesn't get rid of the facts. It doesn't get rid of the evidence. Okay, here, I'll keep going.
are not on display today. I've watched the head, and in this appearance, he's the genetic equivalent of Chicken Little, yelling the sky is falling, but providing no reason to have confidence in his impassioned warnings. Our host, Eric, specifically asks Robert for some math or science to sync.
I think we already gave plenty of reasons to not ignore it. You know what I mean?
Our teeth into, and unfortunately, it never arrives. But wanting to understand and address this topic seriously, I had to abandon Robert's interview and instead turn to the book Genetic Entropy by Robert's H1N1 co-researcher, John Stanford. Here, the hidden assertion Robert tries to make is laid out in black and white. John and Robert claim that all genetic mutations are harmful, and by corollary, that there is no such thing as a beneficial genetic mutation.
Now, with all of this knowledge from geneticists, why is the evolutionary community not recognizing this reality?
That's a good question, Marianne. Why don't geneticists agree with John and Robert's conclusion? John starts by showing a standard bell curve, with the center of the curve representing genetic mutations that have purely neutral, or zero, effect on the organism, with negatively affecting mutations to the left and positively affecting mutations on the right. According to John, this view of the world is a fiction and unsupported by observation.
It's because it stands against 150 years of Darwinian theory.
It's not research. It's not data. That the genetics community doesn't agree with Robert's conclusions must be a deliberate cover-up conspiracy to protect evolution from the secret truth. John writes, population geneticists know that essentially all mutations are deleterious, his favorite synonym for harmful, and that mutations having positive effects on fitness are so rare as to be excluded from such diagrams. As evidence, he points to a diagram he adapts from a 1979 study by Motu Kimura. So what was Kimura's study all about? It was proposing a mathematical model of evolution rates, a function of population size, generation span in years, and rates of neutral and near-neutral mutations. In the graph here, the gray zone represents mutations that are not expressed in the organism's physiology well enough to have natural selection be able to act upon them, and thus they are neutral. John provides this commentary. In Kimura's figure, which, as a side note, does not actually appear in Kimura's research, but was rather adapted by John, he does not show any mutations to the right of zero, i.e., there are zero beneficial mutations.
Okay, so right here, he's going to go on a rabbit trail, as we were talking about earlier, because he's going to say that, you know, John Stanford misrepresented Kimura and his data. But the thing is that the crucial issue about all this is defining the correct distribution of mutational effects. And Kimura left out beneficial mutations. He doesn't show the beneficial distribution, but that's essential to the question of net gain versus net loss. And there's clearly an overwhelming amount of deleterious mutations versus anything that would be beneficial. So that net loss versus net gain is not looking well for evolution.
And regardless if he did or he didn't, the fact remains that he made a prediction. So we need to let that play out. So whether or not he removed that guy's concept and implemented his own in his thesis theory, we're going to find out if that plays out to be true, which we're going to assume, being creationists, that he is right.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Superbad.
Since he brought up beneficial mutations, should we dive into it? Or
Well,
say
yeah.
like the Haldane's dilemma thing?
Oh, he gets there.
Well,
He does.
I would say it's pretty obvious that due to the influx of deleterious mutations, say the rare occurrence of beneficial mutations cannot, and I repeat, cannot compensate for the information loss. It's all about net loss versus net gain. This guy can't seem to understand that. Did you want to briefly touch on Haldane's dilemma there, Superbad?
But Romat said Aronra already touched it. Did you say that, Romat?
No, I was saying that he does get to this. I think at 15 minutes, 24 seconds, he actually gets to the Nylonase enzyme. And then at about 15:40, he moves on to the Milano mutation. So he gets into it himself. We just aren't there yet in the video. I know because I've already tore this guy apart in my book.
Okay,
why don't we discuss Haldane's dilemma or not?
Yeah, you know what? Okay, super bad. Since you're really familiar with that, maybe briefly touch on Haldane's dilemma. Just really destroy this horrible video. Destroy anything Paulogia is saying here. Then we'll continue on to about 15 minutes where he brings up these beneficial mutations. Then we'll really delve into that part of it. I'm gonna run upstairs for a quick bathroom break. Super bad. If you want to touch on Haldane's dilemma, I think that'd be awesome.
Well, Haldane's dilemma is actually a huge problem for evolutionists that they don't want everyone to know about, as far as I'm concerned. Haldane's dilemma is if, for example, a beneficial mutation occurs in a population, it has to increase in the number of copies for the population to progress evolutionarily. If the beneficial mutation remains in one individual, then evolution cannot proceed. This is fairly obvious, right? So in other words, it has to sort of, what is the word in English? It has to substitute, yes, substitute for the non-mutated or not yet beneficially mutated genes in the population. But as we know, I think evolutionists would also agree to this, that the rate at which this can happen is limited. A major factor limiting the rate of this substitution is the reproduction rate of species. For example, for us humans, for a human-like creature with a generational time of about, correct me if I'm wrong, I forgot the exact number, 20 years. Okay, and a low reproduction rate per individual, the rate of growth in the number of mutation in a population will be exceedingly slow. Also, one more thing about Haldane's dilemma, they have two problems here. That was the first one, and this is the second one. Also, the non-mutated organism must die out. Okay, the ones who did not inherit this, who did not have this beneficial mutation, must die out for the lone beneficially mutated organism or organisms to start over and progress evolution. This is a big problem for evolutionists. And if I may provide an example, all right, imagine a population of, let's say, 100,000 apes. Excuse me, is my audio all right? Is there a problem?
No, I hear you fine.
Oh, there's some, seems to be problem here.
No, it sounds good. We can hear you good, super bad.
Yeah, I forgot the example. For example, let's imagine a population of, say, 100 to 200,000 apes. Let's suppose that a male and a female, sorry, I'm not very good speaking in English. Suppose that the male and a female both receive a mutation that is so beneficial that they out-survive everyone else. All the rest of the population died out. Let's say, yeah. And then the surviving pair had enough offspring to what's the word? What's the English word for repopulate or replenish the population in? And then the surviving pair had enough offsprings to replenish or repopulate the population in one generation. And this is repeated every generation, say every 20 years for 10 million years. I'm sorry, the math, I'm not exactly sure of the math because I don't remember the exact numbers. So more or less, it's every 20 years or 100 or 10 million. This process has to repeat every generation for every 20 years for, let's say, 10 million years. More than the time since the last common ancestor and ancestor of humans and apes. Okay, in this case, that would mean that 500,000 beneficial mutations should be added to the population. Okay, 500,000 beneficial mutations. But even with this completely unrealistic scenario, the maximum evolutionary progress, even with this completely unrealistic scenario, which maximizes the evolutionary progress, very unrealistic, only about, crap, I forgot the number again. Only about, I know it's less than 1%. I know it's less than 1%. Only about less than 1% of the human genome could be generated. So as you can see, the evolutionary numbers are way off. It's impossible. The evolutionary origin of organisms with low reproduction rates and low generation times is impossible, even given their usual millions of years. So either way, they have a big problem. That's all, I think. Thank you.
No, I think that's good. And I think that all falls in line with the fact that there's no way to build the genome. There's no way based on a multitude of factors. For example, Haldane's dilemma, as you just went over there. That means evolution can't be true. So say a lot of the evidence that they bring up from, say, the fossil record, whatever it is, these trees that they build, it's based on a faulty assumption, because natural selection, mutations, they're not going to build the genome. They're not going to, no amount of beneficial mutations can counterbalance the accumulating damage. So all of that really just becomes based on a faulty assumption. So it can't be true. Okay, here, I'm going to start. And thanks for that, Superbad. Let me know again if you can hear it, everything all good, Matt. I think that's important for us and the audience. Okay, so I'm going to start it up now.
Mutations shown. He obviously considered beneficial mutations to be so rare as to be outside of consideration. Is that true? Kimura's paper is all of 3 pages long, so John would have had to have read this clarification. In this formulation, we disregard beneficial mutations and restrict our consideration only to deleterious and neutral mutations. Admittedly, this is an oversimplification, but as I will show later, a model assuming that beneficial mutations also arise at a constant rate, independent of environmental changes, leads to unrealistic results. So what were these unrealistic results? Not that beneficial mutations would have too little impact to overcome the deleterious, but the opposite. The presence of any beneficial mutations sent the rate of evolution so enormously high that it overshadowed the model's other predictions. In fact, Kimura's conclusions fly in the face of John's genetic entropy idea, quantifying a rate of loss of fitness at 10 to the negative 7 per generation. He writes, whether such a small rate of deterioration in fitness constitutes a threat to the survival and welfare of the species, not to the individual, is a moot point. But this can be easily taken care of by adaptive gene substitutions that must occur from time to time, say once in every few hundred generations. Agree or disagree? Why would John so dramatically misrepresent Kimura to allegedly establish the rarity of beneficial mutations? This is the very foundation of his genetic entropy argument, and his single scientific source disagrees with him.
But they just then say, well, there's got to be a way to get over this, and it must happen, and let's do more experimenting to figure it out. But the more experimenting they do, the more they box themselves into a corner.
Wow. Perhaps he means experiments like the well-known long-term E. coli evolution study. We know John is aware of it because his book directly quotes Lenski.
Wow.
Lenski set up 12 populations of E. coli.
We'll let him
evolve under nutrient-limited
finish off
conditions
this
for 10,000
garbage, and then
generations.
we'll kill
In
it.
all 12 of the populations, a significant increase in fitness was observed. In the experiment, beneficial mutations arose about every 15 generations, with about 1% of the beneficial mutations becoming fixed into the population. With adequate time and population, 1 in a million is a relatively frequent occurrence. As they say, even if you're 1 in a million, in New York City, there are 8 of you. Yet John says it can very reasonably be argued that random mutations are never good. Never good. He jumps right over rare, straight to never good, while simultaneously citing an experiment where 12 out of 12 lineages displayed positive mutations. He does not mention this result to his readers. Of course, the fact that science has ample examples of beneficial mutations is a mere Google search away.
So you're saying that the genetic entropy that we see today.
So at least he admitted that he's Google. I would love to debate him on these examples. First, before we get to the Lenski one, the Kimura, the figure of mutation distribution there is a rabbit trail, as we said. I mean, even Paulogia, with his limited knowledge, should easily be able to see that most mutations do fall within that, no selection zone, and that almost all of them are deleterious. And I think I said that earlier. So even with strong selection, because no one's denying selection, that entire zone will undergo degeneration. That's obvious. But outside this zone, okay, no one's arguing this as well, the substantially bad mutations will be selected away. That's what natural selection does. And an occasional rare, and Jackson Weed, everybody, they've admitted they're rare, okay? It's as if they're non-existent. So he's not misrepresenting Kimura at all. But even if an occasional rare, high-impact beneficial occurs, it will be amplified, right? And then that can explain isolated events, say like, antibiotic resistance, melanoprotein, whatever it is. And then he makes a big deal about this Lenski long-term bacterial experiment. I think we already destroyed that earlier because we stated and supported the fact that although, this adaptation occurred, the bacteria shrank in genome size, and the rapid growth that he's talking about here, it was accomplished through genetic degeneration. It was an example of reductive evolution. When transferred to a natural environment, these already handicapped, lazy, degenerated bacteria, they're going to be dead on arrival. So that supports our what we're saying about genome degradation. So that proves once again that this guy has no idea what he's talking about.
I laugh at that when they bring the study up, because they don't even know that the original 12 populations, that half of them have developed crippling defects and that they're basically worthless. They basically have been testing to now over 60,000 generations. This was years ago now. That's been the equivalent of over 1 million years of large-scale human evolution. And now they've stated that they're hobbled with accumulated mutations. Reductive and epigenetic regulations has even proven that those bacteria mutate to survive really, really fast to their environment. And they've switched certain genes on so that they can survive. That's what he's calling beneficial mutations. But did you know that if they go back to their original environment, they die? They can't even turn those genes back on. So these are really poor excuses that they have. I guess they never really dug past the surface level of those studies, so no surprise.
May I say something?
Of course, go ahead.
Because you mentioned the rarity of beneficial mutations, I have also noticed in evolutionary literature all over these years that they rarely do the numbers. They claim this can do that, that can do that, but they don't do the numbers. They don't make predictions. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'll give an example. For example, we have 3 billion letters in our human genome, right? And 6 billion from mom and dad. Okay. But let's use the 3 billion. Let's use the 3 billion instead of the 6 here to give the evolutionists a better starting point, giving them an edge, if that's the correct English. Okay, so in 3 billion years, evolution needs at least 8. If I'm not mistaken, evolution needs at least 8 beneficial mutations per year that that codes for new function and capabilities. Okay, when you have 8 mutations per year for 3 billion years, you will get the total of 3 billion letters in our DNA today. decay. And like I said, these mutations would have to be information gaining ones that codes for new functions or capabilities. So again, 3 billion years, they need 8 beneficial mutations per year. For 3 billion years, every year, 8 beneficial mutations in order to achieve 3 billion letters, or 6. Worst case scenario is 6 for them. That is the total of DNA letters in our genome. Okay, the big problem here is that we do not even observe 8 beneficial, real, legitimate beneficial mutations per year that produces new information. And all right, yes, I forgot the second one. The second problem, actually it gets worse for evolutionists. I already said it's only 3 billion, but it's actually 6, because from mom and dad, right? 3 billion from mom and dad.
Yeah.
Actually, the second problem is it's actually worse for evolutionists. The 8 figure is a very, very, as I recall, it's a very, very conservative estimate. Very low estimate. 60 point mutations is more or less the number. So, as you can see from these figures, which is these numbers are open to criticisms, of course, because there are other information gaining mechanisms evolutionists claim they have, and that's also in dispute. So from these figures, you can see that evolution is mathematically impossible to achieve the number of letters we have today in our genome. That's it. Thank you.
No, and you're absolutely right. And even when they invoke, say, let's say gene duplications, they are universally deleterious, okay? They're not the saving mechanism that they want us to believe. And let's just say, let's concede that very rarely there are 1 or 2 that are beneficial. A few rare beneficial duplications are not going to counterbalance or offset the multitude of accumulating deleterious duplications. So let alone all the other near neutral deleterious accumulating mutations. So it's nothing but pseudoscience, nothing but rescue devices. So everything you said there, Superbad, very strong point. Even the slide that I have up, antibiotic resistance bacteria, that's due to a loss of genetic information. And all these examples, they're the opposite of what evolution actually needs, right, Matt?
Yeah, pretty much. They would need constant beneficial adaptations. And if we even look at ourselves in the mirror and be intellectually honest with ourselves, we're going to look in the mirror and we're going to go, okay, let's compare ourselves real quick to a chimpanzee. What do we see? Well, we see weaker muscles, we see weaker teeth, weaker jawbones, weaker immunity. We have we lost all our hair. Like, that's somehow beneficial because now we got to wear clothing, and then we can't.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You know what I mean? Now we have to go under bed and protect ourselves from insects. They don't get cancer, but they have high DNA methylation rates. We get cancer even just standing in the sun. They would never get skin cancer. We can't walk barefoot without problems, and they or risk getting parasites or some other infection. They run around no problem. They have far more nerve fibers. They never get outdoor allergies. They have better hearing because they have like 3 bones in the middle of their ear in their skull outgrowth. They have far better bone density. We only use like 2 or 9% of our digestive ability, especially in the colon, where apes use like 30 to 60%. I mean, really, they don't get AIDS, malaria, or cancer, which kills millions of humans every single year. They're far superior in strength. I can go down the list. Now, what logical conclusion would there be for humans to lose every single beneficial physiological adaptation that there is, just so we can talk to one another, each other, and think? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
No, those are some really good points and facts that you brought up there. That makes no sense at all, really.
No, I mean, we lost every single edge that we had to our environment. Every one that there is. Any animal that we come into contact with, even a chihuahua will draw blood on us. Of course, we can kick it like a football, but that's irrelevant because a chihuahua doesn't exist in nature anyway. But any other animal that we really come across that's walking around can cause us problems. Even from a little mosquito will give us malaria. I mean, those animals don't have these problems. They have few amounts of natural problems in their environment, as where humans are the exact opposite. So why would we lose all those benefits? It just doesn't even make any sense. So we're evolving. Okay, well, great. Now I can't stand in the sun without getting a sunburn or risk getting skin cancer. That's great. So our light source causes us death. That's wonderful. That's a great idea. Yeah, it's just that it's not looked at logically. I don't think they're forgetting. They're looking so technical at the numbers and the aspects, and they're looking for evidence in the wording that they forget to look at it logically as well. I mean, they say, "Oh, we're just 1% different." Well, I tell people, okay, next time you see a chimpanzee from the zoo, take it out. Just put a hat on it and walk it out. They'll never notice. They're only 1% different anyway. And then when you get it out, call up your friend and say, "Hey, man, I met this single girl. She is hot." You know what I mean? And you imagine the look on his face when he sees her. He's going to be pissed at you, or he's going to laugh and say, "This is funny." You just say, "No, she's only 1% different from the other hot girls, man. Don't worry about it."
Well, the thing is, they're so devoted to their science fiction based religion that they're not going to open their eyes to the real data, because you were just saying a lot of it's a numbers game, and they look at the numbers, but the numbers aren't even on their side. The numbers are on our side.
Yeah, when they really get down to it, they really have to invoke a lot of faith. And that's funny that they accuse us of just being faith-based without evidence. Unfortunately, if they looked at their evidence, they would see all the presumptions and the assumptions and everything that goes along with what's required for them to get dates out of a fossil record or things. They can easily obtain the same dates out of testing rocks, out of radiometric dating, that they could to obtain young results. They choose the old results because it needs to fit the narrative. You're given grant money. Are you telling me you're not going to go out and find evidence? You better, if you want to get paid. That guy found Lucy 2 weeks before his grant money, $46,000 ran out. Guess who found that?
Yeah.
You know,
he had no choice but to find that.
Yeah, he would have found anything. Hell, I would have my
grants are on the line. Okay, here you know what? I'll go right through to his examples about Milano and whatever else he uses, and then we'll make sure we cover those in good detail. Okay.
Let's do it.
Just 1 second. There we go.
It goes against Darwinian evolution thought process that we are getting better.
Okay. Positive mutations that we've observed. In the lab, Pseudomonas aeruginosa bacteria evolved the necessary enzymes to eat previously unusable synthetic nylon. If you prefer examples among humans, in a small community in Italy, a mutant version of the apolipoprotein AI proliferated that is more effective at removing cholesterol, giving carriers of the gene significantly lower risk for heart attack and stroke. This mutated protein is being researched as a possible future treatment. While mutations to lipoprotein receptor protein 5 can cause osteoporosis, one mutation can significantly amplify bone density and strength. The real-world carriers of this gene were the inspiration for the film Unbreakable. A mutation variant to hemoglobin, called HBC, protects against malaria. Women with a mutation to the gene for red or green color sensing cones can see colors the rest of us can't experience. They're called tetrachromats. Or, if I may indulge, I personally have a mutation that gave me redundant tendons in my hands and legs. Since cancer took some of the tendons in my right hand, surgeons were able to slide over my extras. I had to retrain my brain, but it was a very beneficial mutation for my particular circumstance.
These genetic differences are actually increasing our complexity and making us better individuals and better as a race. That's right. We're actually going downhill.
And here's the thing about mutations, and any kind of categorization of uphill or downhill, good or bad. A benefit in one environment might be a detriment in another. A mutation that makes a bear's fur white is...
Okay, so yeah, obviously we agree that they're environmentally dependent, but it comes down to, once again, net loss versus net gain. Okay, if you're going up a mountain and you're taking 1 step up and 10 steps backward, it's not going to help you. And the majority proves the rule. And he used the well, we know nylon digestion is a loss of specificity, but in regards to the melanoprotein, and I'll let you kind of go into this, but I know for a fact that in gaining, this antioxidant activity, the protein involved in this, it lost a lot of activity for making HDLs. So the mutant protein is actually, just like the nylon digestion, sacrifice specificity. So once again, net loss versus net gains not looking too well for evolution, right, Matt?
Absolutely. For the first thing, that bacteria that he's talking about, that doesn't exactly digest nylon. It digests broken down bits of the nylon molecule. It's just sloppy scholarship that they wanted to sell, so they advertised it differently. They've also found that there's over 355 different bacterial species that have the exact same genes. Some of them even live in the Antarctic soils, far removed from humanity, where there's no nylon existing. So they can turn those genes on when they need them. So if that was true, then you're telling me that a gene formed for that bacteria never came into contact with over the last, 70 or 40 years has this nylon even existed? So in the last 40 years, Arctic bacteria needed to evolve this thing that it's never encountered before? It doesn't even make any sense. And the melanoprotein works as a broad spectrum antioxidant. It only functions to one targeted aspect, to clean up LDLs when the mutation actually occurs. So basically, it's a single amino acid that has been replaced with a cysteine residue in a protein that normally assembles HDL, which is considered good cholesterol for people. And so it's helped in removing the bad LDL levels. So it's a mutant that has formed, basically. It's already existed. All this material is already there. When a person got sick, a mutation happened, and it ended up being beneficial for that sick person during this time. But when they get better, that mutation will never go back. That's what we've also encountered now as well. We notice that epigenetic regulations, for some degree, when a person gets really sick, those mutations can switch on and they don't switch back off. That's why it's so hard to cure certain forms of cancer. Like that's why they call it stage 1 to stage 4. And usually it's how prolific it is in the body, like how much it is, how much there is. But there's also degrees variant on how much that gene is able to be willing to turn on and off. For example, breast cancer, that's the BRCA1 and BRCA2 gene. If you have that gene, they found they cannot turn genes off. So this is a deleterious mutation that's always turned on. So it's very hard to epigenetically regulate and turn this thing off. That's why I also like transhumanism. It's because they're so into looking at living forever that they really are into looking directly at genes. So I'm really backing that form of science because they know that it has to do with our genes.
So technically so in regards to the melano, and that's interesting about the nylon digestion too. With the melano, the mutant form of this protein, it's deleterious, and there's a net loss of specificity because it's, as you were saying, it's less effective at what it was supposed to do, right? Like, wasn't it able to do multiple things, and now it's reduced to only being able to do one thing?
Yeah, besides it being just like a multifaceted antioxidant that recirculates in the body at all times, it does 4 total different things. Now it's specifically designed to do one thing because that person was sick, and it's to focus on clearing up VLDL cholesterols in the body. The body was like, okay, I'm dying, I need to do this. So that's what it turned on. It switched on to help itself, or else it was going to die.
It's hilarious because every single example that they can provide is really just more and more evidence for genome degradation, because these are examples of decay of prior information. And I've even got a slide here because it's all about adding new, novel, and meaningful information to the genome. And at the end of the day, like I said before, the net loss versus net gain is not good for evolution, right? The melanoprotein loss of specificity, nylon net loss of specificity, aerobic citrate digestion by bacteria with Lenski's experiment, that was based on a loss of information. Sickle cell anemia, right? That produced deformed hemoglobin molecules. It's all based on losses of information. One, I know that maybe we can touch on it here actually, because it's funny, because when I debated Jackson Wheat, he seemed to understand that none of these examples were good examples. So at least he was honest with himself, because it's pretty embarrassing trying to prove evolution by giving us a degraded example. Like, hey, let's lose everything and we'll gain it all. I mean, it's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. So he uses the antifreeze proteins found in Arctic and Antarctic fish. I guess apparently they rose from random mutations, and are now examples of random.
Sorry. Again, it's not random. They were turned on when they encountered absolutely cold water. That's not that they didn't just turn them on in the swimming around in tropical waters. That would be advantageous. It would be a detriment for the fish to even do that. that those genes, there's 4 different types, they're activated, they're epigenetically regulated by the fish, just like they are with human beings, bacteria, and viruses. Genes are regulated. The fish isn't born with this antifreeze gene that's just constantly turned on. It turns itself on when it needs to for survival.
So so would that be like organismal genetic adaptation through these environmental conditions, but based on a biblical model, all creatures have this ability.
Exactly.
So
it's already in. Exactly.
there's no and the thing is, he'll praise that as the best example for new novel information. And yet, once again, like you said, epigenetic regulation, old gene being turned on, adaptation, net loss versus net gain, once again, is in the favor of genome degradation, right?
Yeah, the melanoprotein itself is a protein that's lost its activity for making HDL. That's not a good thing. That's not beneficial at all. So, and that's PubMed. I'm not just stating something that's just random, like, oh, I just thought of that. That should be cool. No, it doesn't even make sense. It's all throughout. I mean, you can post my link to all my work. They can go down, just hit Control F and type in whatever word you're looking for. You'll go down and see it. I post the studies. It's the net loss of specificity. That's it.
No, that's amazing. And you know what? I'm glad we touched on the antifreeze proteins, because we pretty much dismantled every single example that they would have. But according to them, lose it all and you'll gain it all. But
okay, so let's just give them those 2. No, let's give them Milano. Let's give them the antifreeze. By all means, have it. You've given an example of a human being that isn't changing for the better. He's got a disease. Okay, we'll say that, okay, now we can eat all the pork in the world we've ever wanted because we can't build cholesterol. And the fish can now swim in the freezing Arctic without a problem. Where's the fish changing into a whale? Or where's the camel? Where are we? Okay, so we can eat all the pork in the world we want now. Great. Now we're going to be 400 fucking pounds, and we're going to be lazy as hell because all we do is eat things that doesn't raise our LDL cholesterol and cause us to have heart attacks. You know?
Well, I guess that's enough for them to conclude that, elephants and pine trees are related through common ancestry. And how many generations has Lenski raised of these bacteria? Or how many generations of fruit flies? And guess what? Fruit flies have evolved into fruit flies, and bacteria have evolved into bacteria. But apparently bacteria and fruit flies are related through common ancestry. Why? Based on a loss of information. We're going down, not up. And this guy's video, if this is the best they've got, it's pretty sad. Because after my debate with RJ Downard, one guy in the comment section posted this video, and I laughed. Because this is
gotta laugh. It's like the guy
horrible debunking of genetic degeneration. It's absolutely ridiculous. Look at the examples he gave. We dismantled them. I'd love to debate this guy. It'd be great.
Oh, yeah. He would bring up the fruit flies. It's like he doesn't even realize the deleterious mutations that the fruit flies had caused it to have like 4 wings. It couldn't even fly. That's because the degradation of the HOX gene, which causes like the layout of the human body, was mutated. So they think, well, look at it. It's got 4 wings. It's mutating. It's turning into something better. Those couldn't even fly. And it's called a fly. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's not a fly. It's a crawl. Here, I'm not sure how much more substance he has to this video. I think we've dismantled it pretty good. I'll play it again, see if there's anything else we want to rip on. But hopefully anybody that watches this or is watching this can see that there's no way to debunk the truth, because the evidence is clear. I mean, it's so obvious. Here, I'll press play here.
Nice.
The Arctic and very detrimental in the forest. And because environments change, attributes that were once negative or neutral can suddenly become positive when climate or natural resources change, or vice versa. Perhaps the food supply becomes higher in a tree or lower to the ground. The advantage flips. There's no such thing as an objectively good mutation or an objectively bad mutation. And even benefits come with costs in terms of energy expenditure or other compromises. So any graph one may try to make plotting the usefulness of mutations would be valid for one and only one environment. Change the environment, and you change the graph. The entire discussion of beneficial mutations is arbitrary. So to claim no mutation can be beneficial is rather ridiculous.
But when we actually measure the mutation rate and see the mutations accumulating, it's probably 1,000 or 10,000 times too fast
I just want to say, so Alexei Kondrashov, you know, extremely popular population geneticist, he says, why are we not dead 100 times over? And all mutations, contrary to what he's saying, must have some effect on fitness, no matter how small. Because, like I said, all these near neutral nucleotide sites, they contain meaningful information, which means any mutation on it is going to lead to the erosion of that information. It's these low impact mutations are continuously accumulating. And there's a selection cost. Natural selection acts on the phenotype, not the genotype. So he's in conflict with all population geneticists.
So is that is that their argument that evolution and natural selection do not happen overnight? That the deletion of those elements likely has relatively mild effects on fitness, and they are slowly and gradually selected against over time, several or more generations when they arise, but not on observable timescales. That's it, right?
Yeah, that with the unobservable timescales based on what they're saying. Yeah, I think that would be the gist of it, eh, Matt?
So again, they don't have the numbers for this. It's only a guess, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, you're exactly right. It's only an educated guess. It's a hypothesis. It's not science.
Yeah, that's why they invoke a lot of time. They go, well, you see, okay, just because we're not seeing it now doesn't mean it didn't happen in the past. There has to be presumption and assumption going into these things. You have to use your imagination, in other words.
But it's funny because
they don't have testable predictions.
No,
or falsifiable, nothing.
Exactly. It's pseudoscience, just like you're saying, Superbad. And the thing is, time, according to them, is the hero of the plot, right? With enough time, you can turn your bacteria to biologists. But the thing is, based on the evidence, based on everything we're saying here about genetic degeneration, these genomes have a shelf life. It's a very limited shelf life. If you look at something like a horseshoe crab, which we see deep in the geological record, it's exactly the same as it is today. There's stasis, it's unchanged. But we know DNA is degrading. So how is that possible? Based on a limited shelf life, this, say, horseshoe crab, which evolutionists will say is millions of years old, it can't be. It's impossible. So time, even though they think is the hero of the plot, time just leads to more degradation. Time is actually the enemy for the evolutionists, and they don't even see it.
They cannot meet their own standards, so they should shut up and not accuse creationists. They cannot meet their own standards. They set the standard for testable and falsifiable predictions.
I don't get so mad at evolutionists. I just get mad at the evolution theory. It just doesn't really do anything for people. It's a detriment. It hurts the human being. It hurts their mind.
It hurts science.
When they come from an ape, atheists lead the world in depression, suicide, medication. They roll the world in school shootings. It's a horrible system because they believe they have no hope. Death is the end of everything, and we're only here by luck and chance. So it devastates a person's mind, and they don't even realize it. That's why the theory is bad.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point there. Here, I'm gonna finish this off. It's getting kind of late, and see what. I don't think there's anything more of substance here, but we'll see. I'll see what he's got to say.
Asked for Darwinian evolution to deal with.
What Robert and John ignore or dismiss, depending on the chapter, is the effect of natural selection that I assume he's referring to here. The reason beneficial mutations take hold in a population where harmful mutations do not is the observed phenomenon of natural selection. If a change increases reproductive success, then that change is going to be passed along to more offspring than a mutation that limits the opportunity to reproduce. But here, I think we have a couple of experts handy to explain.
All right, so supposedly these countless mutations or happy accidents work with natural selection and survival of the fittest to create creatures who will survive more and more obstacles as they continue to mutate upwards.
Right. Like those who can see better or run faster have a better chance of survival.
The word upwards has the wrong connotation of directionality, but otherwise that's a relatively accurate description. It's embarrassing when the hosts know more than the expert guest. As is affirmed in countless observations that are accepted even by the most dedicated young Earth creationists like Eric, natural selection is a real phenomenon that easily outstrips genetic entropy. When natural selection is allowed to act, there is one species where this may not be the case.
While evolutionary theory predicts that mankind has some higher evolution.
Okay, nothing really but weak arguments here. I mean, he seems
One
to
question.
think. Yeah, go ahead, Superbad.
Sorry. Just one question to Aaron Ra. Where is your testable and falsifiable prediction on natural selection? Give it to us or shut up.
And the funny thing is, he won't be able to give it to us, especially in regards to beneficials. And this guy, he seems to think that as long as these beneficials happen or natural selection happens, which nobody disagrees with, like we said at the beginning, genetic entropy happens after the fact that these are acknowledged. But he thinks as long as those happen, genome degradation, can't be true and evolution must be true. But I don't think he can really grasp how impossible it is to build a genome apart from a designer, because a population, like we're saying here, can be undergoing genetic degeneration, genetic decline based on this continuous accumulation of deleterious mutations, even while, say, selection is amplifying, a few beneficial mutations. But at the same time, natural selection, because the bottom line is that we're all virtually exceedingly mutant, because if we're adding all these mutations to the human gene pool and natural selection only acts on the phenotype, natural selection can only select between fit and less fit, because we're all equally mutant. So if selection, say, were to select against all mutations, no one could reproduce, and that's going to result in instant extinction. So there's a cost of selection. Selection may be able to slow it down, but it's not going to stop it. And we see all the evidence. We see real-time evidence. Matt has been providing that for us for the last hour. Do you have any final things to say there, Matt, in regards to what Paulogia is saying there?
No, I would. Had he moved on into I know he covers a couple more things, but like you said, they're all pretty much the same topic. I remember him talking about malaria, and then he goes into the variations of kind. Like he's like most, you know what I mean? He gets upset with the creationists who use the word kind, even though there's 27 different species concepts. He gets mad that kind is one of them. So,
well, you know what? I'll continue playing it then, and I'll let you finish off the critique. I think his rescue devices of natural selection and beneficial mutations, they're not going to stop the accumulating damage. I think, as we've demonstrated, he doesn't even get into their major rescue devices of mutation count mechanisms, synergistic epistasis. I've debated over 20 evolutionists. None of them bring it up. I'm just waiting for them to do so. But at the end of the day, even those have been falsified. So let me finish this off here, and I'll let you critique the last few things he said and just completely demolish his horrible rebuttal to genetic entropy. Just a second.
All right.
Evolutionary future, the human genome is not lying. We're actually degenerating and becoming less superhuman.
John goes on to claim that geneticists realize that genetic information is currently being lost, which must eventually result in reduced fitness for our species. This decline in fitness is believed to be occurring at 1 to 2% per generation. John references this paper from James Crow throughout the book, pulling short quotations that paint a picture of support for John's contention that the human genome has always been degrading. But that is not the truth at all. Crow specifically limits his findings to the current human population. In the very paper John cites, Crow says, however efficient natural selection was in eliminating harmful mutations in the past, it is no longer so in much of the world. In the wealthy nations, natural selection for differential mortality is greatly reduced. A newborn infant now has a large possibility of surviving past the reproducing years. Except for prenatal mortality, natural selection for effective mutation removal has been greatly reduced. Natural evolution requires descent with modification acted on by natural selection, and humanity has long since pulled ourselves out of the workings of natural selection, as Crow suggests. Modern technology, medical advances, fertility enhancement on one hand, and birth control on the other, all come together to allow human genes to continue that once in our history would not, while artificially capping the passing on of otherwise fit genes of those who choose non-parenting pursuits until the emergence of a new environment.
Oh, did you say something, brother?
No, I just said I love how that's proof of evolution to him. Medical intervention is proof of evolution. Got it.
Everything is proof for evolution to them, right?
That's right. The sloth is slow. The rabbit's fast. The cheat is quick. The roundworm's round and the flatworm is flat. They've got an excuse for every single one of those. So it's not even a theory. Get the hell
No, it's not even a hypothesis. It's a science fiction religion.
Shift that kills a significant portion of our population and necessitates new ways of living, something like drastic climate change, a new disease, or zombie apocalypse.
Hello, people. Zombies. Wake up.
Humanity is largely out of the natural selection game. We are now shaping our environment rather than being shaped by our environment. John has deliberately selected only the parts of Crow's research that support his findings and ignored the parts that do not, thus misrepresenting it.
If humanity is hundreds of thousands of years old, and if our common ancestor chimpanzee was millions of years ago, we'd be extinct by now.
Let's talk about that. How chimps would be extinct by now under Robert's genetic entropy model. Let's say that chimps are 8 million years old, a common approximation for divergence from our common ancestor. With a generation average of 22 years, that means Robert puts 363,000 generations of chimps over the line of genetic entropy extinction. It sounds like Robert also believes that even the corresponding 7,000 generations of humans would have entropied to death. Now let's assume that the Earth and all of its creatures were created 6,000 years ago. That would mean we're on our 12,000th generation of dog, 72,000th generation of rabbits, 365,000th generation of aphids, and 158 millionth generation of E. coli. How have these species survived all these mutations if even the thought of humans lasting 7,000 generations is laughable? If this genetic entropy model is true,
I think I already covered that.
There's no way to stop it. It's the
What's that, Matt?
I already think I covered that. I was telling him already that the chimpanzees have accumulated exactly 140,000 mutations. You know, their average age now is 15, and they're pretty much they're at the end. There was only 600 of them left in the wild. They're dead.
It's kind of like, you know, with artificial selection with dogs, right? You got something like a Chihuahua, which is, you know, been created through a loss of information, genetic degeneration, you know, from a wolf to coyote, dingo, collie, down to a Chihuahua, something completely useless. I mean, there's degeneration in real time as well, just like you said with the chimps.
Well, yeah, we can look at our brain. Our brains have been shrinking. They've tested that. That's proof. There's no doubt. It's I think what 1,500 cubic centimeters down to 1,350 cc now. I mean, it's obvious. We're degrading everywhere.
It's entropic degeneration on all levels, even on epigenetic levels, like you were saying earlier.
Right.
Here, there's one more or two more minutes, and then I'll let you finish. I know you got a few things to say in regards to his points here, and I think we can be quite satisfied that we've demolished this video. Here, just a sec.
Continual degradation of information is going to kill us off.
The true test of any scientific hypothesis or model is how well it holds up to real-world data and the novelty of the predictions it can make that hold true to empirical observation. How well does genetic entropy hold up? Well, in the words of John Stanford himself, it is true that most lab experiments do not show clear degeneration. By the way, anytime someone, even me, Uses a quote from a person in defiance of the known position of that person.
There you go, brother.
I'll tell you why. Okay, this is why it doesn't show that. When you take a lab experiment and you throw, let's just say, bacteria into a petri dish and you throw it in your fucking refrigerator or something, what's going to happen? The epigenetic genes are going to switch over and they're going to adapt to the environment, and 20% will die and the rest will mutate and they'll be good for that environment. This is microevolution. That's what they call it. It's just adaptation of the genes. So they see that and they go, oh, that's perfect. That's all we need for evolution. See, that's proof right there. They don't go any further past. They don't take into consideration that these epigenetic regulations are an actual thing. They're looking at it as a form of evolution when we're not. We're saying, look, there's a lot more to it than just that. So that explains what they just said.
Well, the whole point of the genetic entropy argument, and if anyone doesn't gather this by now, I mean, I question their intelligence level, but it involves the low impact deleterious mutations. So those would be invisible in such experiments. So those experiments don't even have any relevance to the topic and to the debate.
Right. They're not looking at it. They're not looking for it. It's irrelevant. Like you said, it doesn't matter how long those bacteria lives. They're just trying to prove that they can acclimate to a specific environment. That's not any relevance to what we're talking about.
And yet, even when we look at experiments like Lenski's experiments, well, there's reductive evolution for you. So, I mean, the evidence is there for them, regardless of
an experiment that proves us right. That's a great one.
Yeah, exactly. He uses an experiment that is proving what we're saying here. You know what? I want to thank him for that. I might email him after this.
Yeah.
Here, I'll finish it off.
Assume it's a quote mine. I'll provide a link, but I trust you'll agree that Stanford acknowledges his claims are generally not confirmed by experimental data. Robert and John can point to as many rational-sounding mathematical models as they want, showing deadly accumulations of small mutations. But if the predictions of these models are not confirmed by observation, then it is the model that must be adjusted to fit reality. We don't deny reality to affirm the model. In the real world, we do not see this supposed universal decline in fitness on any timescale. It is only by presupposing the idea that nature sprung into existence with complete perfection that this genetic entropy doomsday clock can make any sense. We know that modern humans are taller, stronger, and living longer than humans in the past. And this trend began long before advancements in hygiene and medicine. And to deny that any mutation could ever be beneficial is also to deny the creation-supported idea that species we see today are variations of previous ancestors, that polar bears and grizzly bears are in the same family tree.
Yeah, he's wrong on all that as well, by the way.
In this topic further, please check out an extensive essay on this topic by Dr. Scott Buchanan.
I love how he brought up average height. If you guys
know, goes into great depth on the
everything he just said there was
and the claims made by John
was
and
unbelievable.
Yeah, link in the description. Even among evangelical Christians.
Well, there it is. Letters to Creationists, the blog I was talking about. That's where he got all this from.
Oh, got it. Okay. Well, if you guys actually want peer-reviewed evidence, you can actually read mine. And what's funny is he mentioned height as a proof of evolution of modern man. And we actually have from men from Bosnia, the Neanderthals, the Mortanga. Basically, you can just go through all my research and see how people are actually shrinking. So he's completely wrong.
And I guess the fact that the H1N1 virus, as we were talking about earlier, went from a red hot pandemic to a whimper to an extinction event in only 90 years, you know, the human version that is, I guess that's, you know, not evidence, real-time evidence for him as well.
No, they were chalking up. That's just one virus. I want proof of all of them. When that's like, okay, well, guess what? We've only been studying one virus that long, and it's failed. So what now? You know, are you just going to presume that our 100% accuracy is just a fluke? Got it.
And what do you think about what he said about the different kinds of animals and the various points he brought up there at the end?
Oh, I pretty much tune out when I hear the evolutionists talk about kinds. I just I don't even know what he was getting at. My mind, as soon as I heard about tall people, I just went straight to my work and started looking at all the research that I have on that.
And what's amazing is you've got all the citations, you've got so many papers, and not only from, you know, creationists, peer-reviewed papers, but right from the horse's mouth, right from the evolutionists themselves. And I can't, obviously the amount of real-time evidence of genome degradation that we brought up here, that you brought up here, is astounding and overwhelming. the ones that want to hold to their science fiction religion, these militant evolutionists, they will. No evidence will convince them. But the thing is, ignorance is bliss, like I said, but it's not going to change the facts. And I loved how he said something about falsifiability predictions. Superbad probably caught that. And we've been saying that all along. Show us the testable predictions then with natural selection. Show us the numbers. They can't. So based on their standards, they're failing.
Excuse me. Sorry.
No, you're right. Were you going to say something? Or are you just...
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Many atheist evolutionists are crafty. Sometimes they will randomly present testable and falsifiable prediction, which has nothing to do with the topic. They rely on the fact, and they hope for the fact that people reading it don't know the deep sciences of it. I'm a former atheist evolutionist, so I have idea how they work. They are very crafty. That's all.
No, it's like when I was debating CRISPR. He tried to. We were talking about the ENCODE project and junk DNA, non-protein coding DNA function, and so on. And he tried to bring up something about mice and gene knockouts, and I asked for the numbers, and suddenly he went silent and stuttered and had to get back to me and never did get back to me, because just like Superbad said, they'll cite things, they'll be crafty, tricky, but once you look into it, what they're saying is false. It's fact twisting is what it is.
Well, they need it. They want it to be true. Caligula and Aaron Raw, they need evolution to be true, so they fight it. They're the only alternative is special creation, and they can't allow that to be because it'll destroy the worldview.
Exactly.
Can I one final quote, which I think sums it.
Yeah, you know what, Superbad? If you want to end it here and give us one final thing to say, go ahead, brother.
Because natural selection was mentioned so many times, I memorized this quote from Steven Pinker. He's from MIT. He actually said this in his book, How the Mind Works. That was the title. Page 162. If evolutionists want to accuse me of quote mining, they can go check it themselves. Steven Pinker, MIT, he said that no evidence will be sufficient to create a change in mind. That it is not a commitment to evidence. Take note, he said, it is not a commitment to evidence, but a commitment to naturalism. And he went on to say, because in another part of the page, he said, because there are no alternatives. Because he's close-minded, so he said, because there are no alternatives. So we would have to accept natural selection. He said, we would have to accept natural selection as the explanation of life on this planet, even if there were no evidence for it. Again, the quote was from his book, How the Mind Works, page 162. So that sums up biased atheist evolutionists. Thank you.
I agree. That really does sum up their incredible bias. That's a really good quote and a really good point there. Superbad. Matt, if you had any final things to say, go ahead, brother.
Yeah, man. I don't know. I was atheist as well, and I could have cared less if there's a God. I could have cared less if evolution is true or creationism is true. I just want, where is the evidence? Where's the facts? I just want to know what's true. I could care less. And when we look into the evidence and we get down even into the DNA, we can look at it specifically. And, when they've talked about how much we match chimpanzee DNA, they say it's 99.5% or 98.5%. Then you actually look really good into the details and you realize that they removed 25% of the human genome that didn't match and 18% of the primates that didn't match. So you're looking at like a 55% number. We match so much more a pig than that's why the new theory has evolved that pigs mated with chimpanzees, and that's what actually created humans. So really, I mean, it's they have an excuse for everything. So when the new evidence arises and it destroys the old one, it's like, oh, it's okay. We're still related to them. It's just that they humped pigs That's what caused us to form. That explains why we have skin instead of hair now. See
Yeah.
what I mean?
They're going to bring up something, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very odd. They either have to involve aliens with panspermia, or chimps humping pigs, or we evolved in the sea. That's why our eyes are like match aquatic. There's and then when they go, well, if we didn't match all of that, then because we match all of that, that also proves that we're all interrelated. You know, it's like, well, I don't know. We evolved in the human stomach first. That probably has why we're aquatic. You know, so
well, they've got a wild imagination.
Exactly. They're not using logic. They're using their emotion to base on their predictions because, again, they need it to be true. And that's too bad, because they would really learn a lot more by being willing to accept both sides, even for a while. Why not? They're so mad. I can see even in the comments section of your videos, you'll get more down likes than likes most of the time, because they won't even watch the video, just mad that you exist. Now, why? Why would they be mad that we're trying to help them and show them something? What do we get out of this? I know I never accepted a cent for anything. My work is free.
Yeah,
so
me too.
You know, why in the world would we do this? So we can be ridiculed? Absolutely not. It makes no logical sense.
No, that's a really good point that you made there. We're doing it to help them see the truth. Ultimately, it is to help them, and what do? They scoff, they downlight the video, like you said. It's almost like a mission of theirs to come right on, ignore the content of the video. The video is 2 hours, but within 5 minutes of posting, there's a downlike. I mean,
yeah.
How do you explain that?
Exactly. And where's the comment of like where they're coming at us and saying, why do you think that way? It's you're wrong. Mm-hmm. Oh, really? Oh, you know me. That's fascinating, really. So yeah. I've never done peer-reviewed. Okay, all right, I get it. I guess the general population doesn't want to accept it because they want to be mainstream, and I can understand that. I don't want to fight against the norm myself. There's no real good thing that comes from it, but you know, it's if that's just the whole reason why you do things is because that's what people believe. Oh, well, the majority of scientists believe it, so why don't you? Oh, I don't know. I'm not a sheep, I guess. I don't know. Maybe I've actually looked at the evidence and determined what's right. I don't know. I did martial arts for years, and all I ever heard from my Brazilian jiu-jitsu instructor is, you don't need other styles. You don't need other styles. That was until I couldn't take a freaking guy to the ground one day. I was like, oh, I need other styles, you know? It's a hard reality when you get the hell beat out of you because of a mistake where your dogma let you influence your belief system. So I wasn't going to let science just dictate everything that I believe in life, and that's what it seems to do to people. So we can't be stuck in a dogma, whether or not it's evolution or creation. We have to just use our logic to determine what's real. And if we're going to have to look in the mirror and think that we de-evolved every beneficial adaptation so we can walk around and talk to each other, it just doesn't make sense, especially when the evidence is far more on our side, the empirical evidence, that is.
May I add something? Sorry.
I'm done.
So sorry, just something came up to my mind. Is it okay?
Of course. Go ahead, Superbad, brother.
Sorry. Since Romat opened up about the majority of scientists believing in evolution, here's a fact why 97% of scientists believe in evolution. To those atheist evolutionists out there who love the majority, let me tell you this. Is creation science taught in schools? Let me ask you this. Is creation science taught in schools? No, right? Where do scientists get their education from? Schools, right? And schools only teach evolution. So naturally, most scientists will be evolutionists, correct? It's as simple as that.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
So,
you know what? I think it'd be a good idea if we get together again and do, because I know Paulogia did a video on replacing Darwin, even worse than this one. So we'll debunk the hell out of that one. Thanks so much, guys, for coming on. Superbad, you had a lot of good things to say, a lot of good points to say. You're a really smart guy. Matt, a lot of good points to say. You really know your stuff. I really enjoyed this. I hope we can do this again soon, and hopefully we can get you in as well, Matt, to debate the atheists, because I don't think they're going to stand a chance if you ask me. But until we do this again, guys, Standing for Truth is out.